Good evening, everyone. I'm Louise Deleritz, and together with the other founding members of DOT, we're happy to welcome you to the first edition of our Data Talks. DOT, meaning data-oriented thinking, is the first student society created between ESSEC and CentraleSupélec. Its mission is to allow students from all backgrounds to gain a thorough understanding of the domain of data and its different applications. So tonight is my privilege to introduce Alexis Lê-Quôc, Chief Technology Officer at Datadog, Florian Douetteau, CEO of Dataiku, and Tristan Mayer, CEO of Castor. So we are reunited in this room with three founders at the leading edge of data science field and young professionals, data scientists, and students. And for this intense 1 hour session, we will have two aims that will be guiding the panel conversation. The first aim is for young talents to understand how you have built your data companies. And second, the data science field is evolving at an incredibly fast pace. New jobs keep emerging and disappearing. New tools are continuously created, and it's just hard to keep track of all the changes. That's why we would like to hear from you about where you think the field is headed in the next 3 to 5 years. And with these goals in mind, I will start by briefly presenting the three companies. We will then have a panel discussion, followed by a time for questions and answers. So you can start asking your questions in the chat, and the most pertinent questions will be then used for the Q&A. I would also like to precise that this meeting will be recorded, so please let us know if you have any concerns with this. So let's get started. Datadog is a monitoring service for cloud scale applications. So Datadog helps companies capture metrics and events from different parts of their stack, collect data all the way up and down their stack, and bring it to a single place. So from this, they build insightful dashboards to make some database decisions about their company and infrastructure. Datadog was created in New York in 2010 by Alexis Lê-Quôc and Olivier Pommel. In 2019, the company went public on the Nasdaq exchange and reached a market cap of 27 billion in 2021. Datadog was listed in Forbes Cloud 100 and was ranked in the top 10 fastest growing companies in North America, Deloitte's Fast 500 list. Now moving on to Dataiku. Dataiku is an all-in-one data science and machine learning software platform. Its mission is to democratize access to data and to enable organization across all industries to embed machine learning into the very core of their businesses with the aim of extracting value. Dataiku was founded in 2013 by Florian Douetteau, Clémence Tenac, Thomas Cabrol, and Marc Batty. In 2015, the company established itself in the US, and it achieved unicorn status in 2019 and was named a leader in Gartner 2021 Magic Quadrant for a data science and machine learning platform. And let me now introduce Castor. Castor is a plug and play data catalog. Their tool provides you with a detailed inventory of all data assets in your organization and is designed to help data professionals quickly find the most appropriate data asset for any analytical or business purpose. So the Castor project is quite recent and started in January 2020. Amaury Dumoulin and Arnaud de Turckheim joined in October 2020, and the company was then created. And Castor then completed a seed round a month later in December 2020. So I will now leave the floor to my friend Laure for handling the panel discussion.
Thank you, Louise. And once again, welcome Alexis, Florian, and Tristan, and thank you for joining us this evening. So we'll dive right away into the first topic, as we're all very excited to hear about your entrepreneurial journeys. But we realize the next questions can be a subject of conversations by themselves. So I ask you to keep your answers short to a few sentences. So my first question would be, how did you identify this problem you're trying to solve with your respective companies today? And I'll start with you, Florian, please.
Hello, Laure and Louise, thank you. So to keep it short, I identified the problem that we're solving today by living it, by suffering it. go day by day in organization where the data stack was difficult to work with, where the combination of all the open source technologies that you needed to make happen in order to get anything done was very painful, and where the technologists and the business folks were seeing one another as enemies, as in like, I'm the data scientist doing Python, I know the truth. I'm the business person, you actually don't understand what I mean. But like no actual dialogue was actually existing in most organizations I was working with in terms of like getting things done with data. Like it was client-supplier relationship within the own organization to work on something new and innovative that was complex in itself. And so this is what actually made me want to actually try to solve it with a piece of software initially.
Thank you, that's very clear. Alexis, could you tell us about your idea generation process, please?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. I think for us, it was similar to what Florian just described. It's sort of living the pain for long enough that you feel like there's got to be a better way. I think in our case, it was being on the technology side of a number of companies and kind of seeing inside a tech company, developers and people running sort of operations not being able to agree on what problems were, whether there were problems, and let alone how to solve them. So that's really how we came to try to present with everybody with the same set of data, so they could at least talk about the same reality. And from there then we just let ourselves be led by what customers wanted, and we were, I think, fortunate enough to live individually and personally a problem that happened to be widespread in our industry, sort of the software industry.
Yeah, and we'll get back to this topic a bit later during the conversation. Tristan, do you want to get at it?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Laure. Thank you. Yeah, similarly, we face it not that long ago. We experienced it in our internship for 6 months. We experienced it as well in smaller projects, working with especially one with a huge bank where we had access to a few CSVs, and each time we had access to a newer version, we didn't have any clue about the documentation or what the column mean. And we got the data, there was something missing just next to it. So that's how we just facing it, interviewing people around us, whether there were some good practices about documenting the data, how do they understand it, how do they dive into it at the first step. So really experiencing it, seeing people around just having the same pain and trying to solve it in bringing a piece of software as well, similar to Florian and Alexis.
Okay, thank you to the three of you. And so we hear a lot that it's not to build a successful company. It's not so much about having a groundbreaking idea, but more about having a strong founding team. Maybe Alexis, could you tell us a bit more how you met your co-founder, Olivier Pommel, and how did you know that the both of you had the great fit to launch Datadog together?
Sure thing. So I think in our case, it's a little bit different because I've known Olivier since before leaving, since before graduating, and I graduated a long time ago in the previous, I guess, century. And so the reality is we had worked together probably before launching the company. We had worked together for maybe 10 years in various shops. So we knew already that, we were friends, and we still are friends to this day. So I think we got a good feel for what it'd be like, to run the company and to start the company and then sort of to run the company together. So now I realize not everybody's, is in that fortunate situation, but I do agree that I would say for me, the biggest or the most important quality to find in a founding team is sort of trust and respect. That's what makes or breaks, I think, the team ultimately.
Thank you. And I also remember from a past conference that you had a funny anecdote of how you actually met back at Central. Do you want to share it with the audience? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that's the, so so Olivier and I went to the same, went to Centrale, not the same years. And we met there, but we met without meeting. And the way we met was that I was on the student network, which 20 plus years ago, 24 years ago, 25 years ago, was kind of a novelty. So, people, it was not like, what it is today. And so I got curious and I wanted to kind of look around and, see what it was on the network. Olivier was on the sort of student, team who ran the network. And so they basically caught me, poking around, looking for interesting things to find, and basically went to the basement of the dormitory where I was in, just unplugged me and unplugged my connection. So one day I come back from class and it's like, oh, there's no internet and maybe my computer's broken, maybe maybe something is wrong. So I go talk to them and say, oh, well, by the way, you've been caught and you've been disconnected, and you can't get back on for some time. So that's how we met. He was the one who actually unplugged my connection, but then we actually worked together at IBM. Like maybe when he graduated, I was already a year or two ahead, and so we ended up working in the same office, and from there. Like each other enough that we sort of followed on and worked in various small companies, startups, and sort of bigger companies before founding Datadog.
Great, thank you. So we went over broadly the idea generation process and how to build a strong founding team. I'd like now to address your target markets. And what I find interesting with your three companies is that each one of you have had in the past, currently have the ambition to grow in the US market. I'd like to ask Florian, why is the American market so important for a data company like Dataiku?
It's important because it's where the money is. And at some point you need money to make the business run. It's kind of simplistic, but not completely untrue. The reality of the software market, not just the data market, is that probably that 60–70% of the purchasing power is in the US one way or another. And so at some point, if you compare that to any European country, you actually have a ratio 1 to 10 almost in terms of purchasing power for software. And because of the way the innovation curve works, at some point when you start your company, you only have access to a portion of the market of early adopters. But if you do that only within a local European market, you might have a cap of like 5 or 10 million to your practical market or your practical growth for a certain amount of time. During the same period, because everybody has the same idea, and like if you've got a good idea for a company in France, and if you know at least someone else that might have the same idea, it means that there is probably 30 or 40 people in the US already starting it. So because of that, there is a huge probability that after 3 or 4 years, at least one of these teams in the US actually executed, even if it's complicated to hire in the US and so forth, and blah, blah, and retention of engineers and so on. But so at the end of the day, they might be at 50, 60 million when you are still at 10. At this point, 5 years forward within your organization, you are in the strategic situations where you have companies that are well known than you, that go quicker, that have easier access to capital, and that can get and enter into the European market with a product that they essentially already paid and which is essentially more mature and well-known than yourself. And so it's a strategically a position where you are losing whatever you do, even if your product is better, possibly. And because of that, if you start from a European market, you do have the need for most software endeavors, actually not all of them, because there are some softwares that by nature are actually very big in local markets or are localized. But like for any other situations, it makes no sense not to go to the US market as soon as possible. I mean, and by as soon as possible, I mean as soon as your product has a reasonable market fit where it's not completely ridiculous to try to aim at it.
Thank you. And So, Alexis, in terms of this, would you say the European market has become more attractive since you launched Datadog, or would you still need to be eyeing the US market today to build a successful company?
So I think, I'm 100% or 120% with Florian, and I'll add something to it. So I think on starting and then growing, the US makes a lot of sense. The other piece that exists, and I think that's another way to think about it, is the compounding factor is that in the US there is what we call a common mid-market. So Europe suffers for a couple of problems, depending on, not all countries have the same thing, but so in the US, you sell the same way, whether you sell to somebody in New York, where I am now, to somebody in California, in Texas, and so it's a huge market that has effectively the same buying motion, and that's a big impact on how fast you can grow and how much you can sell, given a sort of fixed amount of money you want to spend to sell. The other piece is that the mid-market is companies that are not startups, but also not huge corporations. And so that slice of the market is big enough in the US where they can buy your stuff. If you're a startup, you're not established, nobody knows you, you probably have a good product, they'll take a chance and buy your product or license your product in a way where if you don't have that mid-market, then it's a lot harder, because startups are not sort of big enough to sustain your growth past maybe the first couple of years. And the large corporations, their procurement cycles, it takes too long to sell to them. It takes a year or 2 years. By then you're wasting a lot of time. So very much, you could assume that, let's say, software market, 75-80% of it is in the US. Europe still makes sense. You should still, and we do, of course, business in all countries in Europe, but it's a harder hurdle. You got to sell to. You sell to UK, it's one, let's say Europe, not the EU, but Europe. You sell to UK, it's one motion. You sell to Scandinavia, it's another. It's similar sales motion. You sell to France, French companies, they buy different ways. You sell to German companies, they buy yet another way. Italian companies, Spanish companies, and so on and so forth. So it's just a lot harder.
Thank you. And so turning to you, Tristan, so you and Xavier studied together at HEC Polytechnique in the MSc of Data Science, and you launched in January 2020. So being such an early stage startup with the ambition of going to the US, could you maybe explain to us what are the struggles that you faced in the midst of launching Castor?
Yeah, absolutely. But first of all, we both went to the US for a year working there as data scientists. So we felt quite close to that ecosystem. We knew as well from what Alexis and Florian just told that this is where all happens and this is where we need to go. So straight from the beginning, we had the ambition of at least trying to sell over there. What's great about this is, again, they know how they know and they can spend on tooling. So they are able to get some budget. Procurement process, sales cycle are shorter than in Europe and in France. So at our stage as well, it's a lot of learnings, trying to sell, trying to build something for them, very different to what exists in France. It's usual to say that they buy fast and they churn fast. It's good for us as we keep learning from them. Main challenges is reaching out to them, obviously. For us, we started, and at our stage, at our maturity, just trying to find people around us in our network, people who know, who we have friends with, to start using the tool. In the US, is outreach, is just trying to get a name, to get Castor on the map. So it's trying to reach out to some people. At first, again, trying with the network, but afterwards, having a proper scalable way of reaching out to them, that would be the next challenge. Again, still learning in the sales cycle, in the way we onboard people, in everything that we do. But the challenge that we're going to face is how to scale our marketing and sales strategy to them. For now, it's about finding the right people, finding the people for whom the pain is really, really important, whether it's on Slack channels, whether it's figure out where those few people are, onboard them, getting them to talk for us to their friends and expanding that way. But yeah, the main challenge is getting renowned and getting on the map there. Obviously, being in France with first French customers, you have to get the reputation there. Main challenge.
Thank you. And I'm sure Datadog and Dataiku probably face similar kind of problems at the beginning of the journey. What I like to speak about is, as you started scaling up, Florian and Alexis, you probably faced challenges of a very different nature. Could you maybe explain to us what these were and how you overcame them, what lessons you learned from them? Thank you.
Where do we start? It's like over 10 years of challenges. You know, I think, at least for us, and I think it's maybe I felt that it was easy to lose that sort of fact, you know, to lose sight of that fact. But I think at the end of the day, the thing you worry about is your customers and your team. That's what you worry about the most. Like, do we have the right product? Is what we're making useful to customers? And obviously, you know, are they willing to pay for it? And you know, do we have the team to execute? That's at least these were this have been and continue to be the two main questions, you know, for us is because I think everything else follows from that. If you're if you're not investing, you know, in hiring the right team, you know, making sure, you know, you cover what you need to cover, or you're mostly focused on, let's say, your competition, or too self-centered in your idea and not listening enough to customers, then it becomes difficult to validate what you're doing. I think to me at least, it's felt like the Datadog has been one ginormous, fun, sometimes painful learning experience. But for the learning to happen, you know, you need to have sort of feedback, constant feedback, and you know, every single stage has had its own, you know, set of challenges. You know, initially it was very much to what Tristan was alluding. It's like nobody knows you, nobody knows what you're doing, nobody really, you know, nobody has a faintest idea of why they should spend time, you know, with you. So you have to find ways to get into, you know, in front of people. So for us, we sort of flew around the country with our little demo stations, our laptops, big monitors, and we just set up shop in small events in the software industry, and just talk to whomever, you know, wanted to hear us about what we were doing. So we started there, and then we scaled that, but it was always the same idea, is that we need to get in front of people who we think may have the problem we're trying to solve. And then we just let the product speak. I don't know, we'll present it, but fundamentally, you know, we've always tried also to build a product that speaks to people, that they can relate to quickly, not where they would have to spend, you know, hours and hours and, you know, millions of euros or dollars to get it up and running. So that's been a bit of our direction. But you know, there are many more challenges, but that would be, I think, some of the axes I would want to mention.
Thank you. And Florian, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that in the initial step of scales, indeed, sometimes you need to focus on what matters and not kind of like think too much, as in order to get in front of customers, you need to get in front of customers. Maybe you don't need to buy services from a brand or designing firm to think about your logo or your marketing messages or whatsoever. Maybe it's actually about getting in with a laptop in front of a customer and actually discuss with them, and like step by step and person by person actually get your product known. Maybe it's not about your business strategy on hiring the best and brightest sales leader during the first 2 years of your company. Maybe it's about actually making sure that you understand what is the fit of your product on your market, what is the exact pain and the problem you solve for, and be honest about it, not imagining what possibly could be the case with a product that you will never build, but like what is the actual thing you will build, and if it's actually relevant, and if it's not relevant, maybe well, pivot or do something else, and that's not bad. I mean, it's better doing that than losing 3 or 4 years of your life. Life is short, and I think this is. I suspect, because I'm not in the current ecosystem as an early stage founder, I suspect that it might be getting harder and harder to stay focused on the problem you solve on your product, just because as the startup ecosystem is growing, the kind of noise or amount of advice you can get from all directions could actually divert you from the problem you're solving to actually potential solutions that might not be relevant for you. But ultimately, you should know the answer to your problem, and you should have the ability to reach to your customers. But yeah, I don't know, in fact.
That's a very good piece of advice. Thank you, Florian.
Okay, thank you to both of you. In terms of product now, broadly speaking, the three of you have created collaborative B2B tools to help your clients better extract insights from data. This is directly linked to data democratization. Maybe Tristan, how would you define data democratization, and why is it so important today? And this is linked to what we were saying. The three of you are solving a problem between different teams with your products.
For what I can see, talking to people in different companies, and especially the scale-ups, startup scale-up phase of a company. Now, when you start a company, when a company is, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years old, data is there since the beginning. Like the 10th person of the company is a data analyst, then the data grows with the company. So now we are saying data is everywhere. That's kind of true in new companies where since the beginning you start to record data about your market, about your product. You want to have the data everywhere. At the end of the day, everyone in the company wants to have a stake in looking into the numbers, digging into the numbers. What we are trying to solve at Castor is making sure this stays under control. And when you have someone responsible for maintaining the data stack, and you're opening up to product manager, to sales ops, to marketing ops, everyone is aligned on what to use and how to use it. But I think what is really important is that in every tool now you have some dashboards. In every tool for any kind of roles, job in your company, you have some data. Trying to gather it in one single source of truth, whether it's a data warehouse or something else, is one thing. But data democratization is for everyone in the company to have access to those numbers and being able to play with it and take decisions based on those numbers. This is growing with what is called now self-serve analytics, where everyone wants to play a bit with the numbers, have access to a BI tool, again, in any different teams. And at the end, it stays in the responsibility and in the stake of the data team to make sure everyone has an access and is able to use good, reliable data. But yeah, it's about opening up data to all the different roles in the company, whether they are really technical or non-technical. And Florian is obviously on trying to do this with even more advanced issues than we are. But for what I can observe and in the ecosystem we're working, is definitely basically everyone in the company wants to play and base their decision on numbers.
Thank you. And so with increasingly many more companies entering this space of data democratization, Florian, how do you differentiate yourself to compete against them?
I guess that's where, that's where I guess there is a question when you build a company, which is ultimately you try to build your space and you try to just own it. And I guess there is something about that at a certain stage of a startup, which seems crazy to me, which seemed crazy to me before, but I think that at some point in an organization, you need to just define the space you want to own. And you say, well, we just try to build the best product possible to just do that. And then you don't talk about differentiation anymore, because anyway, it's just about making sure that for this particular thing, you do it, you're the best, you're the fastest thing you can, and the best product to do it. The problem there, though, that I think that there is that there are so many different use cases for data and AI as a technology that everything is mixed up ultimately. Like we all are working with data, we are all possibly doing some AI, we are all have use cases around data, while we are actually building very different products for different use cases. But at the surface, it's all about data and AI, and the amount of information you need to share before actually making people understand what's different between product A and product B, even if they are very different and working on very different space, is enormous. That's crazy. Like, for instance, Datadog and Dataiku, we don't do the same thing at all. Meaning the main thing we share is the fact that the first letters of the name is the same, ultimately. But and I guess our logo is a bird and not a dog, so which is different animals, I think. But then even if both like trees, I think too. And then so I think the main challenge at some point is just be very clear about defining what you do as an organization to own its space. In our case, it's you have AI as a technology, you've got lots of data internally to the enterprise. The challenge is how do you accelerate the fact for anyone in the enterprise to transform this raw data into interesting analytics and models to get a business impact. So how can you make this business impact as fast as possible out of the data as you have it? Okay, that's one given problem, and that's the problem we are trying to solve. But then it's only one problem among literally hundreds of problems you have with data and that can be solved with AI in the enterprise.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Alexis, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think we took a different route because we started with a clear category, and by category I mean a class of products for a certain group of people trying to solve certain problems. Now it turns out that to solve that, so the group of people are effectively, broadly software engineers, the IT crowd, as it were. That's at least where we started. And the problem to solve is to be able to understand for those who have applications, sort of proprietary applications running, basically to power their business, to help them understand what's going on inside the application. If it's up and down, if it's slow, if it's fast, if it's working as expected, and so on. So now to do that, because of the sheer amount of data that you need to process a bunch of data in real time, that made us a data company, if you will. But originally it was not, I'd say, necessarily a defining feature, as in, we didn't present ourselves as we're a data company and we just happen to solve a monitoring problem. We said, no, we're a monitoring company, and now to be able to do the best job there, you need a ton of data and you need to process data in real time and so on and so forth. So I think it's a variation of what Florian said earlier, which is sort of, in our case, we didn't define this per se the space. We found ourselves in the space to begin with, because that's the pain we lived as end users. So we figured, okay, there's something to do here, and because the space more or less existed, it helped us, not asking ourselves who are we, what are we trying to do, who are trying to do it for. The positive in our case is, I think, when you enter an existing space, the problem typically as a startup is you have even if fairly well-defined one, you have a lot of competition, established competition. And so how you differentiate yourself, if you effectively you solve exactly the same problem, it's tough. I think in our case, what we saw is a shift in the the environment. And by that, I mean, when we started, companies were still largely running applications on premises, meaning they had, data centers here and there, and then have people taking care, racking servers, turning them on, configuring them, installing applications, and so on and so forth. Around the time we started, there was this shift to the cloud, which really meant that's outsourced to someone else, namely Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, by and large. And that shift was enough for us to say, hey, we're in the monitoring space. And everybody knew 30 years ago what it meant. Everybody knew 20 years ago what it meant. Everybody knew 10 years ago what it meant. Everybody knows what it means. If you're in the industry, you know what it means. But because they knew what it meant, it also meant that they have earmarked dollars in the budget to spend. So they say, okay, yeah, monitoring, I spend $1 million a year on it, let's say. When the cloud came to be, what they realized is that the existing solutions didn't work. It just physically not physically, but you couldn't make them work. It was really painful. So they were looking for replacements, and we were one of these replacements. So we got lucky, and it was in a case where it was an existing category. We didn't have to educate our customers on, yes, you need monitoring, and here's why. They knew that, but it was a different sort of environment that forced them to look for solutions. And so all we had to do was say, hey, we exist, we solve this problem in this new environment, the cloud. And we solved the problem that you had before, and you will continue to have. So that's been our journey. It's been still not easy, I think, to scale, but I think you don't start from a blank slate. And certainly when you start, people who may buy your product, they're not a blank slate either. They have an idea, they have a problem, they have an idea on what the problem is, they have an idea on how to solve the problem. So I think you have to, I feel of the start of the first few years is to learn what that is, to sort of understand really, okay, this is the problem we're solving, this is who we're solving it for, this is how they consider what this problem feels like.
Very clear, thank you. So we're running short on time, and I'd finally like to address the students that are in the room with us today. So out of the around 80 people, I'm pretty sure we have around 40% of students, and especially data science students. And I want to bring your attention to the noise that was made around the death of data scientists. I say this because first, data democratization empowers business analysts to slowly replace the job of data scientists. And second, it was said also that AI will soon automate the data science processes itself and replace the need for data scientists. I'm asking the three of you, do you agree with this? And if you do, what does the job market hold for us, future data scientists? Thank you.
Oh my God, I thought I wrote a theory about this. This particular topic, because that's how I make money at the end of the day. So, what we see on the market, well, I've got several theories. One is that, in fact, analytics in the enterprise, as in like I leverage data differently to have a business impact, is something very impactful today. Meaning that if you are in any analytic position and you are completely unable and activated, the kind of impact you have with your company is around, let's say, 1 million on average. Meaning every analyst is building something around, let's say, incrementally 1 million of additional revenue or shift of cost or whatever. This is the kind of order of magnitude you mostly see. That's one. Second is that at scale, we see organizations where you end up having working in analytics, coders, let's say, meaning people that can do some Python or Scala or whatsoever, and non-coders, meaning people that don't do any coding or possibly can do some SQL, but let's say not really, to oversimplify. And you kind of consistently see at scale that it makes sense to have only 5 to 15% of coders. For the rest, being non-coders, in terms of those people being activated in analytics. I'm not talking about just people making reports. I'm talking about people creating a new data set, thinking about cohorts, like doing this kind of more advanced analytics endeavors. I do think it is logical to have this kind of ratios, because at the end of the day, data scientists should logically focus on the kind of analytics that cannot be automated, meaning the custom things, the thing where you need to scale, the thing when you need some refinement, the thing where you need to bring some more edge technologies. And so I think that in the enterprise, as data scientists within the enterprise, you will have this kind of ratios. So indeed, you won't be the superhero saving the day doing everything, but you will be able to focus on more advanced use cases and enable lots of people, which is a very different job. At the end of the day, it can mean that you do less data preparation, which is good, if you think about it this way, and you do less pixel perfect reporting or whatsoever, the main thing. And so I think that will be the case. Then you've got a very different perspective of data science, which is data scientists as embedded within software organizations because of data science or data being part of the product offering itself, which is a very essentially job. Here, I guess the challenge is that it could become more and more blurred between software engineers doing ML and data scientists knowing how to code, where ultimately, as a software organization, I would have rather people that can do a little bit of both ultimately, in order to scale and just in terms of competencies. And so I guess the potential gap or risk for a data scientist is to believe that you can be the data scientist doing end-to-end everything saving the day, while in fact you kind of like to work in a business, and so being embedded in a business function where ultimately you won't be that person building a new product and saving the day, because you will be essentially supporting analyst and business functions.
Thank you,
Sorry,
Florian. No, thank you very much. Does Alexis or Tristan want to add anything?
Tristan, you want to go ahead?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I think because we come with the sort of more defined and more constrained use cases, I guess the other dimension that we have, which is internally, the way we're organized follows roughly the same thing, where we try to embed data scientists in our own product teams so that they can produce, in this case, algorithms and effectively produce results that look at the data we collect and produce, sort of extract interesting information for our customers. The addition we have there is that of what internally we call data science engineering, which is just how to deal with extremely large volumes of data. And so the challenges that are specific to that, which have less to do with the specific analysis or a particular ML technique, but have more to do with how do you move a lot of data. How do you move a lot of compute to a lot of data, or vice versa, and do so sort of at being cost effective, and with being operable and without having sort of constant issues. So I'd say we're the type of companies that would have large scale, but use case analysis and use cases that are reasonably well defined, that are not necessarily that leave some room for the end user to play with, but also try to not have something completely open-ended, where, in other words, we don't have at this point among our customers, I'd say, data scientists that will go and experiment with crazy stuff on our data. We're building that, but we're not there yet. And I think at that point, that'll make us a bit more educated into how customers kind of view data science. But right now, we try to package it as a sort of easy to use. Anybody without a math degree or even without a degree sometimes can use our stuff.
Thank you, Alexis. So we're short on time. I just have one last question, and I'll ask it to you, Tristan. because I cut you off. Why is it, it's to lighten the mood a bit, but why is it that so many data companies have an animal in the names or the logos that concerns the three of you?
That's a good question. For for our part, we had a really good example with with Dataiku and Datadog, obviously. So we are kind of following the trend. Castor, obviously, Beaver in French, came from the data lake and wanting to build the architecture and being the tooling around the data lake. So that's why we've chosen Castor. Why so many companies with I think, I don't know, maybe to try again, democratize, make it sound less technical, less scary for people, to have more friendly little animals, cute ones, for branding our companies.
Well, actually, our logo is a tree, but like we had to, with a little branch, but we had to put a bird on it so that people recognize it. So.
Okay. Thank you the three of you for this very interesting panel discussion. We still have time for a short Q&A, so I'll hand the floor back to Louise. But thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for this conversation. And the first question is a really insightful one from Muit, who points to the fact that when you launch your company, product is really important, but even more important than the product is getting yourself out there and getting yourself to be known by by everyone else. And the problem when you're really small is that you don't have much means, you don't have money, and you have your competitors out here who have loads of who have more means and can really do more advertising than you. So how do you manage to get yourself known and do some advertising when you are facing competitors who have more means? Maybe Tristan, you can, as you're from a company at earlier stage, can you explain how with the means you have, you're getting yourself to be known out there? And maybe Alexis and Florian, you can come after to see to enlighten with what strategies you used when you were back then when you were starting.
Well, at the very beginning, we don't do communication. We don't do much communication marketing. The idea is really to find the first customers, to find by yourself, either by your network, either by luck, just people who will trust you and just make them the most happy people on earth. So they will be able to talk to their friends and talk about you. And just by this network effect, getting some other people trying hear about you. I think network effect is like the best effect on the world for when you're starting out. Obviously, you can't compete on the branding, on the marketing side of it, especially when you're talking about B2B and you need to address a very specific segment of people. So it's about finding hacks, finding people who are going to be able to trust you. And again, finding those few amount of people who are going to trust you, who are going to try out your tool, just become best friend with them. For us, we did even onboarded 2 as co-founders. 2 beta testers became and joined the team. So they are really, really good friends. But the idea is to find as many people like this at the beginning to make them really happy. And afterwards, think about communication and broadening your audience. But we're still in the stage of just making the few first testers, customers really happy so they can talk about you. They can make your communication, your marketing for you.
Yeah, I mean, on our end, we started the same way. I wouldn't worry about marketing budgets and stuff like that. Like, I don't know. Every day I receive hundreds of emails of selling this and that, and like I can't tell you what is what. It's just that I don't. It doesn't register. So I think it's very much early on. You need to find. Your thesis is you're solving a problem that is worthwhile for enough people. So the first mission is to find who these people are. And initially, yeah, you use your network, you go out, you put yourself out there to try to find folks who have the problem. And if you find them, it's a good sign that you're probably doing something worthwhile. If you don't find anybody, then that probably means you're on the wrong track. If you're trying to be reasonably open-minded about where you're going to find them, that's at least for B2B. B2C is an entirely different animal, but for B2B, I think that that's how you start. You start with what you can, and early on, I think if you genuinely care about making, and even later on, genuinely care about making the lives of your customers, make a difference there. Not does have to be a big difference, but it has to be sort of meaningful to them. Then I think that's the that's a North Star to follow. It's like so long as you do that, people will remember. You help if effectively you're helping someone have solve a problem that's otherwise difficult or painful, then we're as social animals, we're so wired to remember. That speaks to the network effect that I think Tristan was alluding to.
Okay, thank you. Florian, do you have anything to add, or should we go on to the next questions?
Let's go on to the next question.
Okay, I think there's recurring questions is that your all offer a SaaS product, a plug and play product, and so that means you have to balance with a mix of consulting and support to your clients, to help them and to teach them how to use your product. So when do you decide when to pull out and when to get your clients to be more autonomous with your software? And I think this one would be more aimed at Alexis and Florian.
Sure. So, I mean, do you want to go ahead? You want to start? Or?
Yeah. Well, I can start. I think it must be consciously part of your business model and your product design in this very question. But I don't think there is like one way to answer. Meaning, at the end of the day, your product, whatever the perimeter actually is, should be about having something at least repeatable and autonomous. Because that's how you actually will build recurring and revenue on the long term. Then you just need to do the math of like how many man days you need in order to make that happen, and if it actually makes sense just from an operational perspective. And the revenue and the business model and your ability to hire the number of people you would need to enable, train, or implement your customers. But the rule of thumb being that indeed it's in most modern endeavors, you end up building products that require only let's say less man days to implement, like a few man days to implement and make most people successful. And you could even talk about ratios between the revenue you generate and the number of man days and the way you think about it. If you are into another go-to-market, where, I don't know, almost the kind of service revenue you make is similar to the number of, to the recurring revenue you make out of the software, it's another motion. And you just need to be very conscious about it when you build your product, or even when you raise money, or when you think about growing your company.
Okay.
Yeah, we went the path of complete self-service for the longest time. So no consulting period. Now that doesn't mean that the product sets itself up automatically. It just means that it's customer doing it. So you have to that forces you into thinking how fast can you deliver value? How much energy does the customer, or initially it's a prospect, have to put in to get value? And so the motion there for us is a sort of free trial, so that effectively lets the customer experiment, test the product, do the initial implementation, and then sort of convert it to a paying customer, and then grow from there. I think what we saw is as you go sort of towards the enterprise market, which is larger companies, it's not so much that the products are harder to set up in a bigger environment. It's just that you have a lot more people that are going to touch it with different use cases and different objectives. And so there we found that it's useful to introduce what we would call, for instance, enablement, teaching, for instance, somebody in a group of people in a particular enterprise customer how to use it, how to find out what their use case is and teach them how to use it and how to use the products to solve their use case and repeat that across the company. And so that's you could, now in our case, it's possible because it's a well-defined problem. At a high level, we're not trying to solve real-time analytics in general for any kind of company that's out there. We're looking at a specific type of data, specific type of processing, specific types of or groups of use cases that are generally fairly constrained. And so that makes it easy for us to, to have self-service. Much like, I don't know, when you buy a new phone, you're not reading a manual. You start using, you download a new app, you're not reading the manual, you start using it. So now the makers have to take that into account. What do you know when you start to install the app? What's your objective? How do we get you there? So for B2B, it's a similar, I think we're in the same boat. 20 years ago, it'd be okay to say, sure, but you're gonna have to spend 3 months of 2 people to set it up before anybody can touch it. I think that those days are long gone.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. I think the time has come to close this event. And I'm sorry, we wish we could have covered all the questions. But I want to say a very warm thank you to Alexis, Florian, and Tristan for this great conversation, for taking the time to participate, especially for those in Paris when the terrace have just recently opened. That big effort to stay inside and keep on with the Zoom trend. And a big thank you to everyone who participated tonight as well.